Take me anywhere but home." She whispered it like a woman who had already lost everything. Soaked dress, mascara down her face, hands shaking in the dark. And when the streetlight hit her face, Ethan Carter's entire world stopped. Because sitting in the back seat of his taxi was the woman he had written 23 letters to. The woman who vanished without a word. The woman whose father had stood at a front door, looked him dead in the eyes, and lied with the calm confidence of a man who had already won. 10 years gone. Because one man decided his daughter's heart was a business asset and burned the evidence to prove it. If this story hits you somewhere deep, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 35 years old, and if you passed me on the street, you wouldn't look twice. I wear the same worn jacket most nights. I drive the same routes through the same neighborhoods. I know every stoplight, every pothole, every shortcut through the back roads of Savannah, Georgia, because I've spent the last 12 years learning this city from behind a steering wheel. My father started this transportation company before I was old enough to ride a bicycle. He built it with his hands, his savings, and a single vehicle that smelled like pine air freshener and old upholstery. When he passed, he left it to me, and I kept it alive the only way I knew how, by showing up every single night. No matter how tired I was, no matter how empty the streets looked, no matter how much some part of me wanted to stop. People ask me sometimes why I never left Savannah. I always give them the easy answer. I say the business kept me here. But that's not the full truth. The full truth is that for years I couldn't make myself leave. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I kept believing that one day I would turn a corner in this city and find the answer to a question that had been living in my chest for 10 years. Why did she leave? I know how that sounds. I know a grown man shouldn't carry something like that around for a decade. I know the world doesn't stop spinning because someone walks out of your life without a word. I know all of that. I told myself all of that on 100 different nights, driving these same roads, watching the city move around me like it had no memory of anything that had ever happened here. But knowing something and feeling something are two completely different things. And no matter how many times I told myself to let it go, the question always came back. Why did Olivia Bennett disappear? That Thursday night in October started like any other shift. I clocked in at 9. I had already done 4 runs. An older gentleman going to the hospital. A college student heading to the airport with 3 overstuffed bags. A couple who barely spoke to each other the entire ride and tipped me $20 without looking up from their phones. Normal night, quiet streets, rain coming down steady and cold. At 11:17, my dispatcher Marcus sent me a pickup. Magnolia Estate. I knew that name. Everyone in Savannah knew that name. It sat on the edge of the city like something out of a magazine. Enormous white columns, sprawling gardens, the kind of property that made you feel underdressed just looking at it from the road. They hosted weddings there mostly. The kind of weddings where the flower budget alone cost more than my entire monthly revenue. I remember thinking, as I turned onto the long private drive, that I was picking up some wedding guest who'd had one too many glasses of champagne. Or maybe a bride's aunt who needed to get back to her hotel before midnight. I parked near the side entrance. I waited, and then the back door of my car opened. I didn't turn around right away. I just said what I always say. "Good evening. Where are we headed tonight?" Silence. Not the silence of someone checking their phone or fumbling with their bag. A different kind of silence. The kind that has weight to it. Then a voice said very quietly, "Take me anywhere but home." Something about those words made me go completely still. It wasn't what she said. People say strange things when they get into cars late at night. They say they're running away from a fight, or they need air, or they just need to drive. I've heard it all. It was how she said it. Like she was barely holding herself together. Like those 5 words had cost her something. I reached up and adjusted the rearview mirror slowly, the way you do when you're trying not to make it obvious that you're looking. And when the yellow light from the parking lot hit the back seat, my hand froze on the mirror, my chest stopped working. Because sitting in the back seat of my car, in a soaked blue evening gown, with mascara running in dark lines down her cheeks and her arms wrapped tight around herself like she was the only thing holding her body upright, was the woman I had spent 10 years trying to forget. Olivia Bennett. I didn't move. I couldn't. My brain was doing that thing where it shows you something impossible and then just shuts down because it doesn't know what else to do. She hadn't looked up yet. She was staring at her hands. Her fingers were trembling. She had a single pearl earring in her left ear and none in her right, like she'd pulled one out in a hurry and forgot about the other. Her hair was half pinned, half falling around her shoulders. She looked exactly like herself, and also nothing like herself. The girl I remembered from 10 years ago had this particular energy about her, this quiet confidence that made you feel like she always knew something you didn't. She wasn't loud about it. She just walked into a room and things settled, like she was the still point in whatever storm was happening around her. The woman in my back seat looked like someone who had been the storm and lost. I made myself breathe. I made myself think about what to do. Part of me wanted to turn around completely and say her name. Part of me wanted to get out of the car and walk away and pretend this wasn't happening. Part of me, the oldest, most buried part of me, wanted to ask her the question I had been carrying for a decade. Instead, I put the car in drive. I didn't say anything. I just started driving. We went through the back exit of the Magnolia Estate property, out onto a side road that ran parallel to the river. The rain was hitting the windshield in sheets. The city around us was dark and empty and quiet. The only sounds were the rain, the wipers, and some old country song playing low on the radio. She didn't tell me to turn it off. She didn't say anything at all. We drove like that for maybe 4 minutes, maybe 5. And then I heard her breathe, in that kind of sharp, shuddering breath that comes after you've been crying so hard you almost forget how to breathe normally, and she said it again. I just needed to get out of there. Her voice was different. Older, a little rougher around the edges, but still hers. Still exactly hers. I kept my eyes on the road. Okay, I said. Another minute of silence, and then Ethan, the way she said my name. I've thought about that moment 1,000 times since then. The way my name sounded in her voice after 10 years of silence. Like she was testing it. Like she wasn't sure it was real. Like she was picking up something she had put down a long time ago and wasn't sure it still belonged to her. I tightened my hands on the wheel. Yeah, I said. It's me. She didn't say anything for so long that I started to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing. If I had been alone on this road for the last 6 minutes and just wanted so badly to hear her voice that I had invented it from the rain. And then she said, I didn't know it was your car. I exhaled slowly through my nose. I figured I saw the headlights in the driveway and I ran and It's okay, Ethan, Olivia. I said her name like a full stop. Not harsh, not angry. Just stop, breathe, it's okay. You don't have to explain anything right now. We're just driving. Another pause. Okay. So we drove. I took us down toward the old part of the waterfront, where the streets curve along the river and the buildings get older and quieter, and you can sometimes go 20 minutes without seeing another car. I knew those roads better than anywhere. I'd driven them so many nights that they felt like home in a way that actual places never quite had. For about 10 minutes, we just drove in silence, and I thought about the last time I had seen her face. It was a Sunday afternoon, early October 10 years ago. We were sitting at the kitchen table in my father's house, and she was reading something I don't even remember what, and she looked up at me and smiled for no reason. Just smiled. The way she did sometimes when she caught me looking at her. 3 days later she was gone. No phone call, no message. No note left anywhere I could find. I called her phone and got voicemail. Then it was disconnected. I drove to her parents' house on the north side of Savannah, and her father answered the door and told me very calmly that Olivia had decided to go study abroad and wouldn't be returning. He said she had asked not to be contacted. I stood on that porch for I don't know how long. I asked him to please tell her I called. He said he would. He closed the door, and that was it. That was the last time I had any conversation with anyone connected to Olivia Bennett. I spent the next 3 months in a kind of fog, still driving, still working, but not really present for any of it. I wrote letters. I know how that sounds now. Writing actual handwritten letters like it was 1,985, but I didn't know what else to do. I wrote to the last address I had for her. I wrote to her parents' house. I wrote to an email address I wasn't even sure was active anymore. Nothing came back. Eventually, my father sat me down at that same kitchen table and said, very gently, the thing no one wants to hear. Son, sometimes people choose a different life, and you have to respect that even when it hurts. I respected it, or I told myself I did. I learned to stop waiting for the phone to ring. I learned to stop looking for her face in crowds. I learned to fill the silence with work, and miles, and the ordinary rhythm of a life that was perfectly fine and quietly incomplete. And now she was sitting in my back seat in a wet wedding dress that wasn't hers. I mean, it was hers, technically. It was her wedding. I would figure that part out later. In that moment, all I knew was that she was there, and the dress was blue and soaked through, and she looked like she had just done something terrifying. After a while I said, "Are you hurt? No. Are you safe?" A pause, then yes, I think so, okay. I glanced at the mirror. "Are you cold?" "A little." I reached back with one hand and grabbed the old fleece jacket I kept folded on the passenger seat. I had to do an awkward stretch to pass it back without swerving, but I managed. She took it without saying anything and pulled it around her shoulders. We drove some more, and then quietly, so quietly I almost missed it under the sound of the rain. She said, "You never stopped looking for me, did you?" It wasn't exactly a question. I kept my voice even. "No, I didn't." She made a sound, not quite a word. Something between a breath and a sob that she swallowed before it could get out. I was told she stopped. Tried again. I was told that you moved on. That after a few weeks, you stopped calling. That you didn't. She couldn't finish the sentence. And I understood right then that something had happened that was much bigger and much uglier than either of us had known. I pulled the car over to the shoulder of the road, slowly because my hands were not quite steady, and I didn't want to drive anymore until I understood what she was saying. I put it in park. I turned around to face her for the first time. She looked like she'd been bracing herself for something. Her eyes were red from crying, her jaw was set. She was holding my jacket closed with both hands. I looked at her directly and I said, "Olivia, I called your number every single day for 3 months. I wrote you letters. I drove to your father's house. I asked him to give you a message. I didn't stop because I wanted to stop. I stopped because I had no way left to reach you." The look on her face. I've seen a lot of things in a lot of backseats over the years. I've seen people receive news that changed their lives. I've seen people cry in the dark on their way home from something awful. I've seen relief and grief and shock, but I had never seen a face do what hers did in that moment. It was like watching someone find out that the ground they thought was solid had been hollow the whole time. "He burned the letter," she said. I went very still. "What, my father?" Her voice cracked and steadied and cracked again. "He burned every letter you sent. He told me. He sat across from me at the dining room table, and he looked at my face, and he told me that you had stopped. That you called twice and then gave up. That you weren't the kind of man who might—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. That I wasn't worth the trouble of staying. The words landed somewhere inside my chest, like something breaking. I didn't speak for a moment, because I didn't trust myself to speak. When I finally could, I said very quietly, "I wrote you 23 letters. She closed her eyes. "I know that now. 23 letters in 12 weeks. And I didn't write them because I thought they'd make me feel better. Or because I had anything eloquent to say. I wrote them because you were the only person in my life I had ever told the truth to. All of it, and I didn't know how to stop." When she opened her eyes, they were full. "He told you I gave up." "Yes. And your father told me you asked not to be contacted." The silence that fell between us then was enormous. 10 years of it. All of it. Sitting in that car between us every month, she had spent believing I didn't care. Every month I had spent believing she had made her choice. Every lie that had lived between us like a wall we didn't even know was there. And then she said something that I would think about for the rest of my life. "I waited for you." Her voice broke on the last word. But she didn't look away. Even when I believed what he told me, even when I thought you had stopped, some part of me kept waiting. Because I knew you. I knew who you were. And some part of me couldn't believe that the person I knew would just— She swallowed. I kept thinking, maybe he's going to call. Maybe he's going to show up. Maybe I'm wrong about what my father said. And the longer it went on without anything, the worse it got. Because then I had to decide, either my father was lying, or the person I thought I loved was someone I had invented. I looked at her. "Which did you decide?" She shook her head. "I decided it was easier not to decide. I decided it was easier to just go. To start over. To not look back." And she laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. "Tonight I found out I was being sold." I blinked. "The wedding." She gestured at the dress. "Daniel Whitmore. You probably know the name. His family does commercial real estate. My father has been trying to close a partnership deal with them for 4 years." She paused. I was the closing terms. I stared at her. "Olivia, I know how it sounds. I'm not an idiot. I knew Daniel and I weren't. I knew it wasn't some great love story. But I thought at least it was real. I thought at least he wanted to marry me, even if it started as something convenient. I thought it had turned into something real over 2 years. Her jaw tightened. And then tonight, at the rehearsal dinner, I walked through the wrong door and I heard my father and Daniel's father talking in the study. And they were? Looked at her hands. They were talking about the merger, about the percentage split, about which properties would transfer in what timeline. And they mentioned the wedding as one of the line items. A line item, a mechanism. My father said, and I'm using his exact words, once the kids are married, the families are legally aligned. It makes the partnership airtight. I didn't know what to say. She looked up at me. I've been a mechanism. That's what I've been. We sat there in the car in the dark and the rain, and I looked at her face. The face I had been trying to stop thinking about for 10 years, and I thought about how much a person can lose without even knowing they're losing it. She had lost her 20s to a father who treated her like a chess piece. I had lost my 20s to a silence I couldn't explain. And here we were, both of us, on a shoulder of a dark road in Savannah, trying to figure out what any of it had cost us. I turned back to face forward. I put the car back in drive. Okay, I said. Okay, what? I'm driving, and you're going to talk. And I'm going to listen. And we're going to figure out what comes next. She was quiet for a moment. Then just like that. Another pause. You're not angry? You're not going to ask me why I didn't fight harder to find you? Why I just... Olivia. I glanced at her in the mirror. You were 24 years old and your father told you a lie. That's not something to be angry about. That's something to grieve. There's a difference. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she let out a breath, like she'd been holding it for years. I forgot, she said softly. Forgot what? That you always did that. Knew the difference between the two. I didn't answer. I just drove. And for a while that was enough. But here is the thing about driving through Savannah at midnight with someone you loved and lost and never expected to find again. The city doesn't stay quiet forever, and neither does the past. Because, as I took us through another curve along the waterfront, Olivia's phone, which she had been holding in her lap since she got in the car, started ringing. The screen lit up. The name on it was one word. She stared at it. I watched her staring at it in the mirror. It rang once, twice. You don't have to answer it, I said. I know, 4-5, but I also can't keep running forever. 6. The phone stopped ringing. A text message came through almost immediately. She read it. Her face went completely still. Then she turned the phone so I could see it in the mirror. The message said, "Where are you? People are asking questions." This family does not do this. I read it twice. He doesn't ask if you're okay, I said. No, her voice was flat. He doesn't. I took a slow breath. Olivia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think about it honestly. Okay. What do you actually want to happen tonight? Not what you're running from. What you want to run toward. She was silent for a long time. The rain kept coming down, the wipers kept sweeping. And finally, she said, I want the truth to come out. I want to stop pretending. And she hesitated. And I want to understand how 10 years disappeared. I nodded slowly. Okay, then that's what we're going to do. Her phone rang again. This time she turned it face down on her knee without looking at the screen. And the two of us drove deeper into the dark city, with the rain coming down around us like the sky was finally saying everything it had been holding back for a decade. I didn't know yet what the morning would bring. I didn't know what would happen when we finally stopped driving. I didn't know how two people were supposed to look at each other across 10 years of silence and decide what any of it meant. But I knew this. For the first time in a very long time, something that had been locked and quiet and cold inside me was beginning to move again. And whatever that was, fear or hope or something in between. I wasn't going to run from it, not this time, so I kept driving. And she kept sitting there in my old jacket. And the city moved around us like it was giving us space. Like it remembered, even if we had almost forgotten. Like Savannah, in its quiet and ancient and knowing way, understood that some things take 10 years to arrive, and are worth every single mile of the waiting. They drove for another 20 minutes without a destination. Ethan didn't ask where she wanted to go. Olivia didn't offer. They had fallen back into something that felt dangerously close to the old rhythm. They used to have the kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable, that didn't need to be filled, that just existed between two people who had once known each other well enough to breathe the same air without explaining themselves. But it wasn't the same, and they both knew it. The old rhythm had been warm, easy, built on years of small moments that added up to something solid. This one was fragile, stretched thin across a decade of missing pieces. One wrong word and the whole thing would snap. Ethan kept his hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road. Olivia sat in the back seat with his old fleece jacket pulled tight around her shoulders and her phone face down on her knee and her eyes somewhere out the window. Somewhere he couldn't follow. He was the one who finally broke it. "Tell me about the last 10 years, he said. "Not tonight, not the wedding, just the 10 years. She turned her head slowly, like the question surprised her. "That's a big ask for a car ride, we've got time." She was quiet for a moment. Then she let out a long breath. "After I left Savannah, my father moved me to Charleston. He had a cousin there who ran a property development office. He told me it was a fresh start, told me the change of scenery would be good for me." She paused. What he meant was it would be good for his ability to control me without interference. Ethan didn't respond. He let her talk. "I enrolled in classes at a university there. Pre-veterinary program. I had this idea that if I just kept moving forward, kept working, kept studying, eventually the feeling would go away." "What feeling?" She looked at the mirror. "That I had left something important behind." He said nothing. "I finished my degree, got decent marks, started a graduate program. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, Daniel Whitmore appeared at one of my father's fundraising dinners and my father introduced us and said." She stopped. "A short, humorless sound," he said. "This young man has exceptional taste and a good head on his shoulders," which in Richard Bennett language means this man has money and his family has more of it. "You liked him?" The question came out before Ethan had fully decided to ask it. He felt the edges of it in his own chest. But he kept his voice neutral. Olivia considered the question honestly. He could see it in the way she pressed her lips together. "I liked that he was calm," she said finally. "He didn't raise his voice. He remembered small details about things I told him. He brought me books I mentioned in passing. He seemed present. Like he was actually listening." She paused. "I know now that some of that was performance. But at the time, after years of feeling like I was just furniture in my father's house, someone actually looking at me and paying attention felt like enough." Ethan absorbed that. "When did you get engaged?" 18 months ago. My father announced it at a family dinner before Daniel had technically finished asking me." Daniel looked slightly embarrassed. I looked at my father's face and I saw how pleased he was. And something in me knew. Even then, I knew it wasn't right. But I was 34 years old and I was tired, Ethan. I was so tired of fighting him on everything. I thought maybe this is just what settling looks like for someone like me." She said that last part so matter-of-factly that it broke something open in his chest. Someone like me. Like she had decided somewhere along the way that she deserved less than what she had once wanted. And he knew exactly when that decision had been made. He knew it had been made at a dining room table in Charleston when a man who was supposed to protect her looked her in the eyes and told her a lie. Ethan took them around a long curve near the old harbor. The rain had softened slightly, still steady, but no longer hammering. The streets reflected light in long wavering lines. "Tell me about your father," he said quietly. "Not the version you tell people at parties. The real one." Olivia turned back toward the window. "The real one." She repeated it, like she was testing the weight of it. "The real one is complicated. He's not a monster. I want to be careful about that. He loves me in the way that certain people love things possessively, conditionally. Like love is something you earn by behaving correctly." She paused. "He grew up with nothing. His family lost everything when he was young and he rebuilt it himself from the ground up and he's very proud of that. And somewhere in building all of it back, he started to believe that everything in his life was a reflection of his choices. His house, his reputation, his daughter." "His daughter," Ethan repeated softly. "His daughter," she confirmed. "He never saw the line between protecting me and owning me. And when I was young, I didn't see it either. I just thought that was what love looked like. That love meant someone making decisions for you, because they knew better." Her voice was steady, but Ethan could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. "When did you figure out it wasn't?" She turned back to look at the mirror. "When he took you away from me and acted like he'd done me a favor." The car was quiet for a moment. Then Olivia said, and her voice cracked slightly on the first word, "I want to ask you something." "Okay, and I want you to answer me honestly, not to make me feel better. Honestly, I've always been honest with you." "I know," she swallowed. "That's why I'm asking." A pause. "When you found out I was gone, what did you think happened, before the letters?" Before you drove to the house, in those first few hours, what did you actually think? Ethan drove for a moment without answering. I thought you had gotten scared, he said. We had talked about the future a lot in those last few weeks. About what it would look like, and I knew your father didn't approve of me. I knew he thought I wasn't enough. So when you disappeared, my first thought was that he had pressured you, and that you had made a choice to listen to him. He exhaled slowly, and then I felt guilty for thinking that, because the Olivia I knew wasn't someone who disappeared without a word. She wasn't someone who let other people make her decisions. So then I thought maybe something happened to her. Maybe she's not okay. Maybe she's somewhere trying to reach me and she can't. He stopped, and then I drove to your father's house. And he answered the door, and he was so calm, Olivia. He was so completely calm. He told me you were fine, that you had gone abroad, that you had asked not to be contacted. And he said it like it was just information, like it was a fact about the weather. He heard her breath catch, and I stood on that porch, he continued, and I looked at his face, and I tried to find something in it, some crack in it, something that told me he was lying. Because if he was lying, then you were still out there, and we could fix it. But if he was telling the truth, he stopped again. If he was telling the truth, Olivia said quietly, then the girl I knew had made a choice, and I had to respect it. She made a sound that was barely audible, almost nothing. He wasn't even nervous, she said. When he told you that. No, he's very good at that. At saying terrible things in a voice that makes them sound reasonable. A pause. He told me once that confidence is just the ability to believe your own narrative. He said it like it was wisdom. It's not wisdom. No, it's something else entirely. They drove in silence for a while after that. And then Olivia said, very carefully, I need to tell you something. About the night before I disappeared. Ethan's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. Okay. I had a conversation with my father that night. A real one. I told him about you. About us. About what I wanted my future to look like. She paused. And he listened. He sat across from me, and he was very quiet, and he let me say everything I wanted to say. And when I finished, he nodded. And then he said he needed to make some calls. She stopped. I thought he was coming around. I thought finally, he's going to accept this. Finally, he's going to understand that this is my life. Her voice dropped. The next morning, he came into my room with a cup of coffee, and he sat on the edge of my bed and he said, very gently, that he had spoken to his attorney. That if I continued pursuing a relationship with you, he would contact every city contract officer he had a relationship with and make sure your father's company was disqualified from any future public contracts. He had done the research. He knew which contracts kept the business alive. He knew exactly how much damage he could do. The car went very quiet. He threatened the business, Ethan said. Yes, my father's business. Yes. The breath went out of Ethan slowly. He thought about his father. About the man who had built that company with his hands and his entire savings and 30 years of early mornings and late nights. The man who left it to Ethan because he believed in it. Because he believed it was something worth passing down. You left to protect my father, he said. Olivia didn't answer right away. I left because I was 24 years old, and I was terrified and I didn't know what else to do. And yes, I left, because I couldn't let your father lose everything because of me. She paused. But I also left because a part of me believed that if I stayed and fought, I would lose. And I was too afraid to find out if that was true. Ethan pulled the car to a slow stop at a red light. Neither of them spoke. He thought about 24-year-old Olivia sitting on the edge of a decision like that. No warning, no time to think. A father who had just turned himself from a parent into a threat. And a girl who loved someone enough to disappear for him. The light turned green. He drove. You should have told me, he said finally. I know, I could have handled it. I know that now. We could have figured something out together, Ethan. Her voice was gentle but firm. I know all of that now. But I was 24 and he was my father, and he had just told me in the calmest possible voice that he would destroy something you loved, and I panicked. I made the worst decision I have ever made in my life, and I have spent 10 years living with it. She stopped. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I'm telling you the truth. Finally, he drove another half-mile before he said anything. I'm not angry at you. You should be. I'm not. He glanced up at the mirror. I'm angry at the situation. I'm angry at a man who thought he had the right to make that call. But I'm not angry at you. She looked at him. You were protecting me, he said. Wrong choice, but the reason behind it, I understand that. She looked away, and then very quietly, the reason I didn't contact you later. After some time had passed. When I was older and braver and maybe should have known better. Yeah, he told me you had stopped looking. And by then, she started again. By then I had already grieved you. I had already gone through all of it. The anger and the disbelief and the missing you and the slow, terrible process of convincing myself that you were okay. That you had moved on. That you were out here living your life. And you were fine. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. And the idea of reaching out, of letting myself hope and being wrong. She couldn't finish it. You were protecting yourself, Ethan said. Yes, from me, from the possibility of losing you twice. He understood that. He wished he didn't, because understanding it made it much harder to be angry, and anger would have been so much easier to carry. They drove in silence for a while after that, the kind of silence that comes after things have been that can't be unsaid and need time to settle before anything else can happen. Olivia's phone rang again. She picked it up this time. Looked at the screen. Her jaw tightened. It's Daniel. Ethan said nothing. She stared at the screen through 2 full rings. Then she answered, Daniel. Ethan could hear a man's voice on the other end. Not the words, just the tone, tightly controlled. The voice of someone trying to sound calm who was not calm. I know, Olivia said. I know everyone is asking. A pause. Daniel, I need you to listen to me. I'm not coming back tonight. Another pause. Longer. I'm not saying that to hurt you. I'm saying it because I need you to hear it clearly so that you can tell whoever needs to hear it and start managing the situation. The voice on the other end changed, less controlled now. I understand, she said. I do, but she stopped. And then something shifted in her face. Something he hadn't seen yet. Daniel, what did you just say? Ethan watched her in the mirror. Her expression went from controlled to something much rawer. Her hand tightened around the phone. Say that again, she said. Her voice was very quiet and very careful. Whatever Daniel said on the other end of that call, it changed something. Ethan could see it happening in real time, the way her shoulders pulled in. The way her free hand came up and pressed against her mouth. I see, she said finally. A pause. Thank you for telling me that. She hung up. The car was silent. Olivia. She didn't answer right away. What did he say? She lowered her hand from her mouth. She looked at her phone, like she wasn't sure what it was. He said he knew about you, she said. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? He said my father told him. Before the engagement. He said my father told him that I had been involved with someone years ago who wasn't appropriate. A driver. Someone without family connections or financial standing. She stopped. He said he was told that I had been difficult in the past about accepting my family's guidance on these things, and that he might need to be firm with me occasionally. The car went completely still. Ethan's grip on the wheel was white. He knew, he said. He knew. He agreed to marry you knowing your father had already. He agreed to marry me, she said, very quietly, while my father was still describing me like a property with a troubled history. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Olivia said, and her voice was different now. Something had closed in it. The way a door closes not from fear but from decision. Daniel also said something else. He said that he's sorry, that he knows that doesn't fix anything. But that he's sorry, is he? I think he might actually be. A pause. He said he's been trapped too, that his family has expectations that he's been meeting since he was old enough to understand what expectations were. That this wedding was never really about the two of us. Ethan absorbed that. He said he's going to tell his father it's off, Olivia continued. That he'll handle it. That he doesn't want me to walk into that house tonight and face my father alone with this. But she looked up at the mirror. But I think I have to. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Not alone, he said. Ethan, I mean it, not alone. She stared at him. He could see the war going on behind her eyes. She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him it wasn't his fight. She wanted to protect him again. The same way she had tried to protect him 10 years ago, by keeping him away from her father's reach. Ethan, she said carefully. My father is not a reasonable man when things are going the way he planned. When things go wrong, she paused. He becomes someone else. And I know what he's capable of, Ethan said. I knew it 10 years ago too. Then you know why I'm telling you to stay out of it. And I'm telling you that I'm done, letting that man decide as what I'm allowed to be part of. The silence after that was sharp. Olivia looked at him for a long moment. Then she said very slowly, you said earlier that you spent 10 years driving these roads, trying to answer a question. Yeah, and now you have the answer, part of it. So what are you still doing here, Ethan? You don't owe me anything. 10 years ago I made a choice, wrong choice, yes, but I made it. You didn't ask to get pulled back into this. You don't have to. Olivia. He said her name and she stopped. Stop trying to talk me out of the room. I'm not 25 anymore, and I am not going to stand on a porch and watch a door close in my face and call that respecting a decision. Not this time. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. He burned 23 letters, Ethan said. He told me you didn't want to be found. He told you I stopped caring. He took 10 years from both of us and called it protection. He paused. I'm not angry enough to do something stupid about it. But I'm not walking away from this either. Something in Olivia's face went soft in a way he hadn't seen yet tonight. I forgot, she said. What? How certain you always were about things. I used to think it was just confidence. When we were young. I used to think you were just one of those people who always knew their own mind. She paused. But it was never arrogance. It was something else. I could never figure out exactly what. And now? She looked at him steadily. Now I think it was just you. Just the way you're built. That thing where you know what's right and you do it, without making a performance out of it. He didn't have a response to that. Or he did, but he wasn't ready to say it yet. He checked the time on the dashboard. 2:43 in the morning. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for sunrise. He had done enough wedding runs to know what that meant for guests arriving at 5. Ceremony beginning, just as the light started to come up over the river. That gave them maybe 2 hours before the situation reached a point of no return. We need to figure out what you want to do, he said. Not what makes sense, not what's polite, what you actually want. She was quiet, because there are options. You can stay in the car until morning and make decisions from here. You can go back and face it directly. You can call someone, a friend, an attorney, someone who isn't me and isn't in that house, and let them help you build a plan. Or he looked at her in the mirror, or you go home and you tell him the truth to his face. All of it, what you overheard, what Daniel told you, what you know about the letters. Her breath caught. And see what he does with it, Ethan continued. Because here's what I've learned about men like your father, Olivia. They are very powerful in the dark. They are very powerful when the thing they're doing stays hidden, and everyone is too afraid to say it out loud. But the moment someone says it out loud, he let the sentence hang. She picked it up. They stop being as powerful, she said. They stop being as powerful, he confirmed. She sat with that for a moment. Her phone buzzed again. A text this time. She looked at the screen, and her face changed again, not dramatically, just a small tightening around the eyes. She held it up to the mirror. The text from her father said, I know you're with that Carter boy. Come home now. Ethan read it twice. He noticed the word boy. He noticed the tone of someone who had not yet decided to panic. Someone who was still in the register of authority. Someone who believed, still, that if he said the right words in the right voice, the problem would correct itself. He knows, Olivia said. He always knew. He was watching. He knew I would come to you. Did you? Ethan asked. Come to me, I mean, on purpose. She looked at the text message. Then she looked up at the mirror. I got into the nearest car, she said. I didn't think about anything except getting out. But a long pause. But when the door opened and I heard your voice. When I realized it was you. Another pause. I didn't get out. He held her gaze in the mirror for a moment. No, he said. You didn't. She looked down at her father's text message again. And then she did something he didn't expect. She typed back 3 words. He could see her hands moving. She sent it. Then she turned the phone so he could see the screen. She had written, I know everything. The reply came back in 11 seconds. Come home immediately. Olivia set the phone on her knee, face down. Her hand was completely steady. Ethan looked at the road ahead. You sure about this? He asked. She was quiet for one breath. 2. My whole life, she said. I have made decisions based on what I was afraid of. I left Savannah because I was afraid. I stayed in Charleston because I was afraid. I said yes to an engagement because I was afraid of fighting. And every single time I chose fear, she stopped. I lost something I couldn't get back. He waited. I'm not choosing fear again, she said. Not tonight. The dashboard clock read 2:51. Ethan reached down and turned off the country station that had been playing quietly under their conversation for the last hour. The car got quiet in a different way, a focused way. A before something happens way. Tell me the address, he said. Olivia told him. He turned north. And they drove toward the Bennett house in the dark, with everything that had been hidden between them finally out in the open, and everything that was waiting for them at the other end of that drive still unresolved. But there was something different now. There was no more silence between them that felt like distance. The silence now felt like two people standing at the edge of something enormous, neither one stepping back. That was not nothing. That was in fact almost everything. And Ethan Carter, who had spent 10 years driving these roads alone with a question he couldn't answer, finally understood that the question had never really been why she left. The question had always been whether they would ever be brave enough, both of them, to do what they hadn't done 10 years ago. Face it, together. The Bennett house appeared at the end of the long, tree-lined drive. Every light in the house was on. Every light in the Bennett house was on at 3 in the morning, and that alone told Ethan everything he needed to know about the man waiting inside. Richard Bennett was not someone who sat in the dark and waited. He was someone who turned on every light in the building so that when you arrived already feeling like you were walking into something he controlled. Ethan parked at the end of the drive. Neither of them moved right away. He could feel Olivia in the back seat behind him, not looking at the house, not looking at her phone. Just very still, in the way that people sit when they are gathering something from the inside before they have to spend it on the outside. "You don't have to go in the front door," he said. "Yes, I do," she said. "Front door, full lights, no sneaking." "Okay, he expects me to be ashamed, to come in quietly, head down, ready to apologize." She paused. "I'm not going to do that." "No," Ethan said, "you're not." She reached for the door handle, stopped, looked at him in the mirror one more time. "Ethan, whatever he says in there, whatever he tries to use, I need you to know that I'm not going to let him redirect this. He's very good at making conversations about him. I'm not going to let that happen tonight. I know, and if it gets loud, I've been in loud rooms before." She looked at him steadily, then she nodded, once, and opened the door. They walked toward the house together, and the front door opened before they reached the top step. Richard Bennett stood in the doorway in a dress shirt with the collar open, jacket off, and the look on his face was the kind of look that takes years of practice to perfect. Not angry, not panicked, controlled. Coldly, deliberately controlled, in the way of a man who has decided that showing his actual emotion would be a form of losing. He looked at Olivia first, then his eyes moved to Ethan, and something shifted in his expression. Something small and quick that was gone almost before it appeared. But Ethan caught it. It was recognition, and underneath the recognition not quite fear, but the cousin of fear. The thing you feel when a problem you thought you'd solved walks back up to your front door. "Olivia," he said, his voice was measured. "Come inside." "We're both coming inside," she said. A pause, very brief. "This is a family matter." "Then it concerns me," she said. "Because he's the reason we're having it." Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He stepped back. He let them in. The front entry of the Bennett house was the kind of space designed to remind you of the distance between yourself and the people who live there. High ceilings, polished floors, everything in its place. The kind of order that takes staff and money, and a deep belief that the physical world should reflect your personal control over it. A woman appeared at the far end of the hallway. Ethan recognized her from years ago, Margaret Bennett, Olivia's mother. She looked older, thinner. She had her arms crossed at her waist, and her eyes went immediately to her daughter with an expression that was equal parts relief and dread. "Olivia," she said softly. "Thank God, Mom." Olivia's voice softened briefly. "I'm okay. Your dress, it doesn't matter." Richard walked past both of them into the sitting room without waiting to be followed. That was also performance. Come or don't come. Either way, I'm already moving. Ethan recognized the technique from 100 difficult rides with difficult people. The ones who lead the room, even when they're the problem in the room. They followed him. He was standing near the window when they came in, hands at his sides, and he turned to face them with the particular deliberateness of someone who has decided exactly how this conversation is going to go. "Ethan Carter," he said. His voice was even, almost pleasant. "It's been a long time, it has," Ethan said. "I suppose I should ask what you're doing in my house at 3 in the morning." "I'm here because Olivia asked me to be." "Olivia," Richard said, pivoting to his daughter, without acknowledging Ethan's answer, "is not thinking clearly tonight. She's upset. She's reacting to something she misunderstood." "I didn't misunderstand anything," Olivia said. "You overheard a portion of a conversation. I heard you tell Robert Whitmore that the wedding would make the partnership legally airtight. I heard you laugh about it." The room went quiet. Richard's expression didn't change. That was the tell. When a reasonable person is accused of something they didn't do, their face changes. His didn't, not even a flicker. "Business and family are not mutually exclusive," he said. I have never once made a decision about your life that I didn't believe was in your best interest. You believe that, Olivia said. I know that. You believe it so completely that you burned Ethan's letters. You believe it so completely that you sat across from me and told me he had stopped calling when he called every day for months. Her voice was rising now, not out of control, but ascending, building the way water builds behind something that was never meant to hold it. You believe it so completely that you threatened to destroy his father's business if I didn't disappear from his life. The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Margaret made a sound from the doorway, very quiet, very small. Richard's eyes moved to Ethan for a moment, then back to Olivia. That is a gross oversimplification of, did you burn the letters? A beat. I made decisions that I believe. Did you burn the letters, Dad? She said it the second time without the question mark. Not asking, requiring. The silence that followed lasted long enough that it was its own answer. The Carter boy wasn't right for you, Richard said finally. And the way he said it measured, certain, with the absolute conviction of someone who had long since decided that the verdict was beyond appeal, made something go hard in Ethan's chest. He didn't have the resources. He didn't have the connections. He drove a car for a living. You had a future. He is standing in this room, Olivia said. Do not call him the Carter boy. Richard looked at Ethan directly for the first time. You turned my daughter against her own family, he said. His voice was still controlled, but there was something underneath it now. You drove up to my home at 3 in the morning, and you walked through my front door. And you want me to pretend that's appropriate. I drove your daughter home, Ethan said. His voice was even. From an event she escaped from, because she found out her wedding was a business transaction. That's what I did tonight, a business transaction. Richard almost laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. You have a very dramatic way of describing. Robert Whitmore's company gets 64% of the commercial block development rights on River Street, Ethan said. The room went absolutely silent. Richard stared at him. Ethan kept going. The merger gives Whitmore commercial access to Bennett Properties' existing city contracts, which have 14 months left before renegotiation. The wedding solves the trust issue between the families. Legally aligned, as you put it. It's clean. It's efficient. The only thing it isn't is a marriage. He had done his research on the Whitmore name years ago, when Olivia mentioned it in the car. He knew the structure of the deal, because Marcus, his dispatcher, had a brother who worked in the city planning office and talked too much at poker nights. Savannah was still a small town in the ways that counted. Richard's jaw was tight. You don't know what you're talking about. I know enough. You know nothing about. I know that you burned 23 letters. Ethan's voice didn't rise. Didn't waver. I know that you looked my father in the eye and shook his hand at the Chamber of Commerce dinner in 2009. And then spent 3 weeks quietly making calls to make sure his company couldn't bid on Forsyth Park restoration contract. I know that when none of that worked fast enough, you went to your daughter's bedroom and you told her a lie, and you let her believe it for 10 years. The silence after that was enormous. Margaret made a sound from the doorway. This time it was louder. Richard, she said. He turned to look at his wife. Something passed between them, quick, complex, layered with years of history, that had nothing to do with anyone else in the room. Richard, Margaret said again, the Forsyth contract. You told me that fell through because of the city budget. Margaret, this isn't the time. Did you block Frank Carter's company from that contract? It's not that simple, answer me. It was the first time Ethan had heard Margaret Bennett use that tone. In all the memories he had of her from years ago, soft-spoken, gracious, always a few steps behind her husband, in any room he had never heard her voice carry that particular edge. Richard looked at her. He looked at Olivia. He looked at Ethan. And then he did something that Ethan did not expect. He sat down, not in a controlled, deliberate way, in the way of a man whose legs have decided that standing isn't working anymore. He sat in the chair nearest to him, and he put his hands on his knees, and he looked at the floor. The room stayed quiet for a moment, and then a sound came from the hallway. Footsteps on the front porch. The front door, which hadn't been fully latched, pushed open. Daniel Whitmore walked in. He looked like a man who had not slept in a long time and had made several important decisions on his way over. His jacket was gone. His shirt was untucked. His hair was not the carefully arranged version of itself that it had probably been at the rehearsal dinner. He stopped when he saw the room. His eyes went to Olivia first, then to Ethan, then to Richard, seated in the chair, then to Margaret in the doorway. I should have called, he said. I'm sorry. The door was open. Daniel. Richard started, and his voice was trying to reassemble itself into authority. This isn't the time. Actually, Daniel said, I think it's exactly the time. He moved into the room and stopped near the fireplace and looked at Olivia directly. I'm sorry. I should have said that on the phone, but I wanted to say it in person. I'm sorry. Olivia looked at him. I heard what you heard tonight, he said. Or not heard it. I didn't overhear the same conversation. But I've known about the structure of this arrangement for longer than I should have let it go on. How long? Olivia asked. He didn't look away. Since about 6 months into our relationship. The air in the room shifted. Daniel, Richard said from his chair, warning in his voice now, sharp and clear. Daniel ignored him. My father told me what the wedding needed to accomplish. He told me what the Bennett partnership would mean for our company's position on the River Street development. He framed it as he said it was just context. That I should understand the bigger picture. That what Olivia and I had between us was real, and this was just also true at the same time. He paused. I let myself believe that. I wanted to believe it, because I did care about you, Olivia. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't pretending. But I also wasn't brave enough to say that the way this was set up wasn't right. And that was a failure on my part. A real one. Olivia was looking at him with the expression of someone recalculating something they thought they already understood. Did you know about what happened 10 years ago? She asked carefully. Between me and Ethan. Daniel glanced at Ethan, then back. Your father mentioned that you'd had a previous involvement with someone who wasn't, and his word, not mine, suitable. He mentioned it as context, as part of explaining why you might have some trust issues. That was the phrase he used. Olivia turned back to her father. Trust issues, she repeated. That's what you called it. Richard looked up from the floor. His voice, when it came, was quieter than it had been all night. Everything I did was to protect this family. You keep saying that. Olivia's voice was not loud, not shaking. It was the voice of someone who has found the absolute bedrock of what they mean to say and is standing on it. You've been saying it for 34 years. Every decision, every choice you made for me instead of letting me make it. Every time you decided you knew better than I did about my own life. You always said it was protection. She paused. But protection is supposed to keep the person safe, not just keep the person in reach. Richard's face moved. Something in it shifted not into softness, but into something that was the preliminary of softness. The way ice shifts before it cracks. I kept you close because you were afraid, she said. That's the real answer. Not because you were protecting me. Because you were afraid that if I made my own choices, they wouldn't match the life you built. And that felt like losing something. She paused. But Dad, I was never yours to lose. The room stayed very still. Margaret had moved from the doorway to the edge of the couch. She sat down slowly, carefully, like she was placing something fragile on a shelf. Richard looked at his daughter for a long moment. I only ever wanted the best for you, he said. I know that. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that Ethan would remember afterward, as the moment the entire room changed, was that her voice was completely honest when she said it. No sarcasm, no truth. I know that's true. But Dad, you decided what the best was without asking me. And then when I tried to tell you it wasn't working, you burned the evidence and lied to my face. Olivia, 23 letters, she said. He wrote me 23 letters. And you sat across from me at the dining room table, and you told me he had stopped caring. You looked at my face while I was still grieving him, and you told me that he had given up. Richard opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I know what you were trying to do. She wasn't done. And the worst part, the thing that keeps me up even now, is that you never considered what it would cost me. You weighed my future against your plans and you decided the plans won. And you did it so completely that you convinced yourself it was the right thing. Ethan stood very still near the door. He was watching Richard Bennett's face, and seeing for the first time tonight something real in it. Not the controlled surface, not the performance of authority. Something underneath. Something older and more complicated and considerably more human. I didn't want you to struggle, Richard said. I struggled anyway, she said. Just with different things. Richard looked at his hands. The Carter business, he said. His voice was quiet. Your father, he looked at Ethan. I made calls, I did. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I believed at the time that it was necessary. Necessary, Ethan repeated. I wanted her to have a clear path. My father spent 4 months trying to figure out why his bid was rejected, Ethan said. And he kept his voice steady. Because this wasn't the moment to be loud, and he knew it. He thought he'd made an error somewhere. He went through everything, every form, every number, every reference. He was convinced he had made a mistake, and he couldn't find it. And it took something out of him. The kind of thing you don't get back. Richard looked at him. "I know you didn't," Ethan said. "You made the calls and you moved on to the next thing. Because for you it was a maneuver. For him it was his livelihood." The room was absolutely silent. Daniel had moved to stand near the window. He was looking at the floor. Margaret had her hands pressed together in her lap, and she was watching her husband with an expression that was something Ethan couldn't fully read: grief, maybe, or the final arrival of something she had been avoiding for a long time. Richard Bennett was quiet for a long time, and then slowly he said, "I owe you an apology." He was looking at Ethan. Not at his daughter, at Ethan, for your father. "Whatever I thought I was accomplishing interfering with a man's business without his knowledge was wrong. That was wrong." Ethan looked at him. He thought about what he wanted to say. He thought about the 10 years. He thought about his father at the kitchen table, going through his bid documents for the 4th time. He thought about what it costs a person to be wronged by someone who never has to face the consequence of it. "That means more than you probably know," he said finally. "But it's not enough by itself." Richard looked at him. "The letters," Ethan said. "And what you told her. That's what did the real damage. That's what cost both of us 10 years. Richard turned to Olivia. And for the first time all night, for possibly the first time in a long time from the look of it, Richard Bennett's face was completely unguarded. "I told myself I was protecting you," he said. "And somewhere underneath that, I think I actually believed it." But he stopped, tried again. "But I also knew it wasn't entirely true. And I kept going anyway." Olivia was very still. "Is that an apology?" she asked quietly. "It's the beginning of one," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. And then she said, and the exhaustion in her voice was real, deep, unmistakable, "I'm not doing the wedding, Dad. I need you to understand that. Not because I'm trying to punish you. Because it's not a marriage, and I'm not a closing term." Richard flinched. The word hit him. Ethan saw it. "I never thought of you as—" "That's the problem," she said gently. "You never heard yourself." Another silence. Daniel shifted near the window. "My father is going to have significant feelings about this." "Your father," Olivia said, without looking away from Richard, "is going to find out how real people make real decisions. It might be educational for him. The ghost of something. Something that might, in a different moment, have been." A smile crossed Daniel's face. "Probably," he said. "You're going to be all right?" she asked him. Directly, like the question mattered. He looked slightly surprised to be asked. "Yeah," he said after a moment. I actually think I might be." Richard stood up from the chair. He looked smaller than he had when they came in. Not physically, just different, like something had been rebalanced. He looked at Ethan. "You drove her home," he said. "I drove her home, and you walked in my front door." "I walked in your front door." Richard was quiet for a moment. "I'm not going to pretend I'm comfortable with that. I know, but I'm also—" He stopped. Something was clearly costing him. "I'm also not going to pretend I have the standing to object to it." It was the closest thing to graciousness that Ethan suspected Richard Bennett was capable of in this moment. He didn't push it further. Margaret stood up from the couch. She walked across the room, and she put her arms around her daughter. And she held on without saying anything, the way mothers hold children, when words have run out, and all that's left is presence. Olivia held on too. Over her mother's shoulder she looked at Ethan. He looked back. The clock on the wall read 4:17 in the morning. Somewhere in the city, wedding guests who had no idea any of this was happening were in hotel rooms sleeping through the last hours before a ceremony that would never take place. The flowers were still arranged at Magnolia Estate. The chairs were still in rows. The archway was still standing at the edge of the garden where the sun would come up in less than 2 hours. And in the Bennett house, 4 people stood in a room where something enormous had just been said, and would never be able to be unsaid. Ethan was aware of a feeling in his chest that he hadn't had in a long time. It wasn't happiness exactly. It wasn't resolution. Not yet. Resolution was going to take much longer than one night in a well-lit house. But it was something. It was the feeling of a door opening. Not to a room he already knew. To one he hadn't been allowed to look at in 10 years. Richard walked past him toward the hallway. He stopped at the door. Turned. "You should stay," he said. He was looking at Ethan. "Both of you should stay until morning. It's late." A pause. "And there's a great deal more that apparently needs to be said." Ethan looked at Olivia. She was still holding her mother. But she turned her head to look back at him. There was something in her face that was new. It hadn't been there when she got into the car. It hadn't been there on the road, or in the long conversation about lost years, or even in the driveway when she made herself walk to the front door with her chin up. It was there now. Something clear. Something that had been buried under 10 years of decisions made from fear and had finally been allowed to surface. She gave him the smallest nod. He turned back to Richard. "Okay," he said. Richard nodded once. Then he walked out of the room. Margaret gently loosened her arms from around Olivia and touched her daughter's face with both hands and looked at her for a long moment, the way you look at someone you almost lost and didn't fully realize it until just now. "I'll make coffee," she said. Then she followed her husband out. Daniel picked up his jacket from where he'd dropped it, by the window. He looked at Olivia, then at Ethan, back to Olivia. "For what it's worth," he said. He tilted his head slightly in the direction Ethan was standing. He came back to a lit house, full of Bennetts, and walked through the front door. "He did," Olivia said. "That's not nothing." "No," she said quietly. "It's not." Daniel left the room without drama. They heard the front door close softly behind him. And then Ethan and Olivia were alone, in the sitting room of the Bennett house, where everything had just come apart, and where slowly, reluctantly, the way it always goes with things that have been damaged by time and pride and fear, the very first, most fragile pieces of something new were beginning to form. She looked at him. "Thank you," she said, "for not letting me go in alone." He looked back at her. He said, "Not this time." She sat down on the couch. She looked exhausted, in the bone-deep way of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has finally been allowed to put it down. He sat across from her. Neither of them said anything. But it wasn't the silence of before, the stretched, fragile, tentative silence of two strangers who used to know each other. It was a different kind of silence now, the kind that doesn't need filling. Outside the window, the sky was still dark. But it was the specific dark of very late or very early, the kind that means the light is not far behind. And Ethan Carter, who had spent 10 years driving alone through a city full of other people's stories, sat in the house of the man who had tried to erase him, and waited for the morning. He wasn't afraid of it. For the first time in a long time, he was not afraid of what was coming. The coffee Margaret made was strong and too hot, and nobody complained about either of those things. It was 4:32 in the morning. And the four of them, Ethan, Olivia, Margaret, and Richard, were sitting around the kitchen table in the kind of silence that exists after a storm has passed, but before anyone is ready to confirm that it's actually over. The kind of silence where you keep listening for thunder that might still be coming. Richard had his hands wrapped around his mug and his eyes on the table. Margaret sat close to Olivia, not touching, just close. The way you position yourself near someone you've been afraid of losing, and haven't fully let yourself feel the relief of not losing yet. Ethan sat across from Olivia. He was aware of how strange this was. Of all the places he had imagined being at 4:30 in the morning in his life, the Bennett kitchen was not among them. And yet here he was, drinking Margaret Bennett's coffee at her table, in a house he had stood outside of once and been turned away from, and nobody in the room was asking him to leave. That was something. Richard looked up from his mug. "The Forsyth contract," he said. He was looking at Ethan. "I need to say it plainly, not wrapped in context. What I did to your father's business, that was deliberate, and it was wrong. I've told myself a version of that story for years, where I was protecting my daughter's future. But what I actually did was hurt a man who had done nothing to me. And I did it without his knowledge, and without consequence to myself. That's not protection. That's just power being used badly." The room was very quiet. Ethan looked at him across the table. He thought about what to say. He thought about his father again, the good man, the careful man, the man who taught him that the way you do small things is the way you do all things, and who spent 30 years building something real from almost nothing. He thought about how his father had never once, not once, spoken badly about Richard Bennett, even when he had every reason to. He thought he had simply come up short on the bid. He blamed himself quietly for years. He never knew it was deliberate, Ethan said. "I know," Richard said. He thought he made an error. He went through every document he filed for that contract, over and over, trying to find where he went wrong. He never did find it, because there wasn't one, and he carried that for the rest of his life. The idea that maybe he wasn't quite good enough. Richard's face moved. I know you didn't," Ethan said. That's the thing about consequences you don't have to watch. You don't know what they cost. Richard set down his mug. He pressed the backs of his fingers against his mouth for a moment. He was a man trying to hold something difficult and finding that he didn't have quite enough room for all of it. "I'm sorry," he said, "to you, for your father, I'm sorry." Margaret was watching her husband. Ethan couldn't read her expression entirely, but there was something in it, not surprise exactly. More like the recognition of something she had needed to hear for a long time and hadn't been sure she ever would. Olivia was looking at Ethan. He gave her the smallest acknowledgement. Not a nod, just a shift in his eyes that said, "I'm all right." "Stay with me," she exhaled slowly. "What happens now?" Margaret asked. Not to anyone in particular. "To the room," Olivia said. "With everything." Olivia thought about it. "The wedding doesn't happen," she said. "That's not a negotiation. I'm not going back to Magnolia Estate this morning and standing under that archway and saying words I don't mean to someone I don't love in front of people who have no idea what's actually been happening in this family. That's finished." Richard opened his mouth. "Dad," she said it quietly but with a firmness that stopped him completely. "I need you to hear me say that and not respond with a strategy. Not with what it costs, not with what Robert Whitmore is going to say. I need you to hear me as your daughter, telling you a true thing about her own life, and I need you to just let it be true." He looked at her, long moment. "Okay," he said. The word was small, but it was real. "Thank you," she said. "Robert Whitmore," he said, and he almost sounded tired when he said it, "will survive the inconvenience. His company always does. He won't like it, he'll make that clear. But the world will not end, because a business deal doesn't get laundered through a church ceremony." The word laundered hung in the air for a moment. Olivia looked at her father with something complicated on her face. "That's the most honest thing you've said about it," she said. "I know." He picked up his coffee again. "I'm having a very honest morning. It wasn't quite a joke, but it was the edge of one. And the fact that Richard Bennett, at 4:45 in the morning, at his kitchen table, could find the edge of a joke about the worst night of his family's recent history, that was something. It was a sign of life from someone who had been operating in armor so long he'd probably forgotten what his own face felt like without it. Margaret stood up and refilled everyone's coffee without asking. It was a small thing, the kind of small thing that holds a room together. At 5 in the morning, Olivia's phone lit up on the table. She looked at the screen. Her expression changed. "Robert Whitmore," she said. Everyone looked at the phone. It kept ringing. Richard looked at his daughter, then at the phone, then back at his daughter. "You don't have to answer it," he said. The sentence so close to what Ethan had said to her hours ago in the car clearly landed on Olivia the same way. She looked at her father with an expression that was surprised, and then quietly moved. "No," she said, "I don't." She let it ring out. The voicemail notification appeared a moment later. Then a text, all caps. She tilted the phone slightly so that only she could read it, and whatever it said, she read it and set the phone face down on the table, with the careful deliberateness of someone choosing not to be controlled by a screen. "He's at the venue," she said. "He says there are 140 guests arriving in 2 hours and someone needs to make an announcement." "Someone will," Richard said. "You?" Olivia asked. He looked at her. "It's my family, my responsibility." "Our family," Margaret said from beside the coffee maker. Firmly, without heat, just correcting the record. Richard looked at his wife. "Our family," he said. Something passed between them. The kind of thing that only passes between two people who have been together for a very long time and have built up a language of small gestures and loaded silences that nobody else in the room can fully read. But whatever it was, it settled something between them. Temporarily maybe, but enough for right now. Richard stood up from the table. "I'll call Robert," he said, "and I'll go to the venue." He picked up his phone from the counter. He stopped, turned back to the table. He looked at Ethan. "You've been in my house for over an hour. You've been nothing." But he paused, chose his words with visible effort. "You've been measured. In a situation where you had every reason not to be." Ethan didn't respond. "I don't know what the future looks like," Richard said. "With any of this." He gestured slightly, meaning Ethan and Olivia, meaning everything, meaning the enormous rearrangement of things that had happened tonight. "But I understand that I don't get to decide that anymore." He said it like it cost him, because it did. Ethan nodded once. Richard left the room. They heard him in the study, making calls. His voice through the door was low and controlled, and none of them could make out the words. But the tone was different from the tone he'd used earlier in the sitting room. Less authority, more conversation. Like a man who was slowly remembering how to speak to people instead of at them. Margaret sat back down at the table. She looked at Ethan with the direct, calm attention of a woman who had been watching people carefully for a very long time. "You came back," she said. "I drove Olivia home," he said. "I don't mean tonight." She was quiet for a moment. "You didn't leave Savannah. After everything, you stayed." He thought about how to answer that. "This is home," he said. "For Olivia too," Margaret said. "Even when she was in Charleston. Even when she was telling herself she had made a life there. She called me every Sunday, and she asked about Savannah, the way you ask about a place you're not ready to stop belonging to." Olivia looked at her mother. "Mom, I'm not embarrassing you. I'm just being honest." Margaret looked at her daughter with the calm, steady love of someone who has decided that honesty is worth whatever temporary discomfort it causes. "I watched you be unhappy for a long time. I told myself it was your life, and your father meant well, and these things work themselves out. And I was wrong to do that. I should have pushed harder. I knew about the letters." The room stopped. Olivia went very still. "What?" she said. Margaret's hands were folded on the table. Her voice was even. But Ethan could see what it cost her to keep it that way. "I didn't know he burned them," she said quickly. "I want to be clear about that. I didn't know that until tonight. But I knew that letters came. I saw the envelopes in your father's study, once before they disappeared. I asked him about them, and he told me he was handling it. And she stopped. I let him." The silence in the room was different from all the silences that had come before it. Olivia was looking at her mother with an expression that was going through several things at once. "You knew letters existed," she said carefully. "Yes. And you didn't tell me." "No, Mom." Olivia's voice broke very slightly on the word and then came back together. "I spent a year thinking he hadn't written. I spent a year believing that what my father told me was true because there was nothing to contradict it." "I know," Margaret said. "I grieved him, Mom, for a year. And you knew. I knew letters had come, and your father said he was handling it, and I was afraid of what would happen if I pushed him on it. I know that's not enough of a reason. I know, but I need you to hear me say it plainly, so you know I'm not pretending it didn't happen." Olivia pressed her lips together hard. She looked at the table. Then she looked at her mother. "Is this the honest morning for everyone?" she said. "Apparently," Margaret said softly. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Then she did something that surprised the room. She reached across the table and put her hand over her mother's hands. Not easily, not without effort, but she did it. "Okay," she said. "Olivia, okay," she said again. "I'm not ready to say it's fine. It's not fine, but I hear you, and you're telling me the truth now. And that matters." Margaret turned her hands over and held her daughter's. They stayed like that for a moment. Ethan looked at the window. The dark outside it had changed its quality, not light yet, but the deep solid black had started to thin at the edges. The specific blue-gray that means the light is an hour out. Maybe less. He checked the time on his phone. 5:21. He thought about the wedding venue. About 140 guests arriving. About an archway where the sun would come up over the river. About all the logistics of a ceremony that had never been anything more than a contract, being carefully unwound by a man who had built it. His phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. Marcus. His dispatcher. The text read, "Bro, are you okay? You went dark 3 hours ago." Dispatch is losing their mind. He almost laughed. The ordinary world, still turning. He typed back quickly, "All good. Personal situation. I'll explain tomorrow." And then he put the phone face down and came back to the room. Olivia was watching him. "Your dispatcher," she guessed. "Yeah. Do you need to go?" He looked at her. "Do you need me to stay?" She held his gaze for a moment. "I think I can handle the morning," she said. "I think I need to handle it." A pause. "But don't go yet," he said. At 5:45, Richard came back into the kitchen. He looked like he'd aged slightly. In the 20 minutes he'd been in the study. Not in a dramatic way, just settled. Like the things he'd been carrying at a certain angle had shifted and found a more honest position. "Robert is furious," he said, sitting back down. He poured himself more coffee without looking at the mug. "He used some language I haven't heard since a construction foreman I employed in 1987 dropped a load of framing lumber on his own truck. Nobody said anything. The partnership is likely finished," Richard continued. He made that very clear. The River Street development will proceed without Bennett Properties. He paused. "I'm going to the venue at 6 to speak with the guests. Daniel's handling his side of it. We agreed on a statement. Brief, civil. The ceremony is postponed due to mutual agreement between the families. He looked at Olivia. Is that acceptable? Postponed, she said. He looked at her steadily. I thought cancelled might be unnecessarily brutal for the guests who have traveled. She thought about it. Postponed is fine, she said. As long as we're clear between us that it means cancelled. We're clear, he said. She nodded. She said it carefully. The River Street deal. I know what that costs you. He waved a hand, not dismissively. More like putting something down he's been holding. It's business. Business recovers. A pause. Daughters are harder to get back. The kitchen was very quiet. Margaret made a small sound. Richard looked at his coffee mug. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness, he said. To Olivia, I understand that's not. I understand this is not a one-night fix. What I did, what I let happen. The things I told myself were true, he paused. But I'm asking if we can start. Whatever starting looks like. Olivia looked at her father for a long time. 10 years is a long time to carry something. And the human heart is a complicated piece of machinery. It can hold anger and love for the same person simultaneously. Stack them on top of each other like floors of a building that were never designed to share the same structure. It can know that forgiveness is different from absolution, and still feel the pull of it. Still feel the particular exhaustion of carrying damage that began the moment someone you loved decided they knew better than you did about your own life. I can start, she said finally, but slowly, Dad. Slowly and honestly. No more managing, no more narratives. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be the real one. The real one, he repeated. The one where I'm a person. Not an asset. He flinched at the word, but he didn't look away. The real one, he said. Okay. At 6:15, Richard left for Magnolia Estate. Margaret walked him to the door, and they stood on the porch for a moment, speaking quietly. Ethan and Olivia stayed in the kitchen. Through the window above the sink, the sky had begun to change. The blue-gray was turning. The first thin edge of light was starting to define the horizon. Olivia was looking at it. Sunrise, she said. Yeah. When I booked this venue, I thought sunrise was romantic. I thought it was the most beautiful time to start something new. She paused. I didn't realize it would be the most beautiful time to end something that was wrong. Ethan looked at her profile. Sometimes those are the same moment, he said. She turned to look at him. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then she said very quietly, what happens now with us? Or whatever this is, whatever tonight was. He thought about that. I think that depends on what you want it to be, he said. She looked at the window again. I want it to be honest, she said. I want it to be slow. I want it to be. She stopped. I don't want to jump from one thing I wasn't ready for into another thing I'm not ready for. I've spent 10 years making choices from the wrong place, and I'm done with that. Okay, he said. She stopped again. He waited. I also don't want to pretend tonight didn't happen, she said. I don't want to shake hands and say, well, that was interesting, and go back to being strangers. I'm not suggesting that. I know. I'm saying it out loud. For myself, she looked at him. I'm 34 years old and I just walked out of my own wedding and sat in my father's kitchen and dismantled a decade of very careful lying, and I am going to need some time to figure out what the ground feels like under my feet now that all of that is gone. Take it, he said. And I'll be here, he said. Not going anywhere. Not for the reasons I didn't go anywhere before, not out of waiting or holding on to something that wasn't moving. But because this is my city too, and my life is here, and if that puts me in your path sometimes, then I'm not going to apologize for that. Something in her face shifted. Something warm. You are exactly the same, she said. Am I? In the best way. She paused. That thing I said in the car about how you always know the right thing. You do it without making it a speech. You just say the true thing and let it land. He looked at her. You always made it easier to be honest, he said. You were always that, even when we were young. Easiest person in the world to tell the truth to. Her eyes went bright for a second. Then Margaret came back in from the porch, and the moment breathed out into the ordinary again, coffee cups and morning light, and a house rearranging itself around what had happened in it overnight. He'll be all right, Margaret said, meaning Richard. He's not a bad man, Ethan. I hope you know that. I know he's not, Ethan said, and he meant it. Bad men don't sit at their own kitchen tables and admit they were wrong. They just keep going. Margaret looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded. Once, like he had passed something she hadn't announced she was testing. At 6:40, Ethan said he should go. Olivia walked him to the door. They stood on the porch where the morning was coming in, full now, the light breaking over the city in long horizontal lines, that turned everything it touched into something slightly more itself than it had been in the dark. She had changed into her mother's cardigan somewhere in the last hour. Her hair was loose. She looked tired in the way that comes from something important having happened, rather than just from a long night. She looked like herself, more like herself, maybe, than she had in the back seat of his car, with her wedding dress soaked through, and her hands trembling. "Thank you," she said. "You already said that, I know." "I'm saying it again." He looked at her. "Olivia, yeah." "The clinic," he said. "The animal clinic you told me about once when we were young. You said you wanted to open one near the coast." She looked slightly surprised that he remembered. "Yeah," she said. "Is that still?" "Yes," she said. And something lit up in her voice when she said it, quick and real, like a match being struck. "Yes, that's still the plan. That's always been the plan." "Good," he said. "You still want to expand the company?" "Already started," he said. 3 more vehicles since last year." Looking at a fourth, she smiled. Not the polite smile she'd probably had ready to use at her own wedding. The real one. The one he remembered from 10 years ago that had always done something he couldn't explain to his enter chest. "We're both still going," she said. "We're both still going," he agreed. He walked down the porch steps to where his car was parked in the long drive. He stopped at the bottom, turned. She was still there, in the cardigan, in the morning light, with both hands in her pockets. He said, "When you're ready. When you have your ground back under you, and you've had time to breathe and you know what you actually want, instead of what anyone else has decided you should want." "Yeah," she said. "Then we'll talk." She looked at him steadily. "And if it takes a while?" she asked. "Then it takes a while," he said. "I've been on these roads 12 years. I know how to keep moving." She looked at him a moment longer. Then she said very softly, "Don't go too far." He held her gaze. "I'll be exactly where I always am," he said. He got in the car. He sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel, and the morning coming through the windshield and the whole enormous weight of the night, settling into something he could actually hold. He thought about his father. He thought about 23 letters. He thought about a girl who sat on a dock and promised forever, and then disappeared. And a man who told himself he respected a decision she had never actually made. He thought about the long drive through the dark city. The rain, the voice that said, "Take me anywhere but home." He started the engine, and, as he drove back through Savannah in the early morning light, past the old buildings, and the river and the streets, he 1,000 times before he understood that everything looked the same from the outside and nothing was the same on the inside. And that was exactly how it was supposed to feel when something real had happened. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. He glanced at it, at a red light. A text from an unknown number. He opened it. It said, "I still have the photograph from the dock. The one your father took that Sunday. I kept it. I thought you should know." He looked at the message for a long moment. The light turned green. He drove. And for the first time in 10 years, Ethan Carter drove through Savannah without a question in his chest. Just the road, just the morning, just the certainty, quiet, solid, real, that the story that had started on a dock 20 years ago had not in fact ended. It had only taken a long time to find its next chapter. And that was all right. Some chapters take exactly as long as they need to. The text with the photograph stayed in Ethan's phone for 3 days before he responded to it. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he understood. In a way he couldn't have explained to anyone who hadn't spent the last decade driving alone, through the same city, carrying the same unresolved weight. That some things deserve to be answered carefully. That some things, if you rush them, you break them again, before they've had a chance to hold. He went back to work, the morning after everything happened. Marcus met him at the garage at 7, with a cup of gas station coffee, and the expression of a man who had been waiting a very long time to ask questions. He wasn't sure he was allowed to ask. "You good?" Marcus said. "Yeah," Ethan said. "You look like you drove through a decade last night." "Something like that." Marcus handed him the coffee. Watched him for a moment. The Bennett wedding got cancelled. It's all over local news. Something about mutual agreement. He paused. "You want to tell me why your car was parked at the Bennett house at 3 in the morning? Or are we going to do the thing where I pretend I don't notice things?" Ethan drank the coffee. "Later," he said. "Later like today, later, or later like you'll tell me sometime in the next calendar year? Later, like when I've figured out how to explain it." Marcus looked at him for another long moment. Then he nodded and let it go, because that was what Marcus did. He knew where the edge of a conversation was, and he respected it. That was why they had worked together for 9 years, without a single serious disagreement. Ethan drove his routes that day on autopilot, which was not unusual. The routes were so deep in him by now that he could drive them without thinking and be fully present for the thinking. He picked up a retired schoolteacher going to her book club, a young couple going to the airport, a man about his father's age who reminded him, in the way he held himself carefully, like someone who had built something and was still tending it, of his father. He thought about his father a lot that day. He thought about the Forsyth contract and the bid documents his father had gone through, over and over. He thought about how his father had never once pointed blame at anyone, had never speculated about interference, had just looked inward, the way honest people do when things go wrong, and assumed the fault was his own. And Ethan had watched that happen, and not understood what was causing it. There was grief in that. A specific, delayed kind of grief that arrives years after the event, when you finally understand something you didn't have the information to understand at the time. He sat with it. He didn't try to rush past it. On the third day, he picked up his phone and opened the text from Olivia. He read it again. "I still have the photograph from the doc. The one your father took that Sunday. I kept it. I thought you should know." He typed back, "I'd like to see it sometime." Her reply came in 4 minutes. It said, "Saturday morning? There's a place near the waterfront that does coffee. Nothing formal, just coffee." He stared at the message. Then he typed, "Saturday works." She sent back a simple address and a time. 8 in the morning. He recognized the street, a quieter block off the main waterfront drag, the kind of place locals went when they didn't want to wait in line with tourists. He put the phone down. For the first time in a long time, he had somewhere specific to be on a Saturday morning. That felt different than he expected it to. The week moved. The city moved. Savannah did what it always did, existed in its particular way, old and unhurried and layered with the kind of history that lives in the walls of things, rather than in the official accounts of them. Ethan drove his routes. He submitted the paperwork for the 4th vehicle. He had dinner with his cousin Darnell on Wednesday, and didn't mention anything about the night of the Bennett wedding, and Darnell, who had known him long enough to read the specific quality of his silences, didn't push. On Thursday, Olivia called. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," she said. "Hey, I just wanted to, I don't know. I wanted to hear your voice. Make sure you were still real." A pause. "Is that strange?" "No, Kay," she exhaled. "I've been staying at my parents' house this week," which is a short sound. "My father is trying. I want to be honest about that. He's trying in a way that is visible and uncomfortable for him, which I think means it's real." "What does trying look like for him?" "He asked me yesterday what I wanted to do with my life." She said it like it was still slightly surreal to her. "Not what I was planning, what I wanted." He actually used that word. "And then he sat and listened while I told him about the clinic. The whole thing. The location I've been researching. The kind of practice I want to run. The specific population of animals I want to serve. All of it." He sat there for 40 minutes and just listened. How a pause. "Weird," she said, "and really, really good. In a way that made me want to cry a little, which I didn't do in front of him, because I think we both need to adjust to this pace before we start doing the emotional heavy lifting." He was smiling without realizing it. "What about your mother?" he asked. "Mom and I had a long conversation on Tuesday night. About the letters, about what she knew and when she knew it." She stopped. "It was the hardest conversation I've had in maybe my whole life. Because she's my mother and I love her and she let me down, and both of those things are true at the same time, and there's no clean way to hold that." "No," he said, "there isn't, but she didn't make excuses. She just kept saying, 'I know and I'm sorry, and you deserved better from me.' And somewhere around the 3rd time she said it, I believed her." Olivia's voice was quieter now. "I don't think forgiveness is a switch you flip. I think it's more like a direction you decide to walk in. And I've decided to walk in that direction with her, even if it takes a while to get there." "That's the right way to think about it," he said. "Is it, or does it just sound right?" "Both," he said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive," she laughed. "The real one." He had spent 10 years not knowing what had happened to that laugh, and now he knew where it had gone, and that it was still intact, and that information was doing something significant to his chest. "Saturday," she said, 8 o'clock, "don't be late. I'm the kind of person who shows up 7 minutes early and then feels anxious if the other person isn't also 7 minutes early." "I'll be there at 7:53, he said. "Perfect," she said. and he could hear the smile in it. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Olivia." He set the phone down on the counter of his kitchen and stood in the quiet of his house for a moment, just breathing. 12 years in this house. His father's house. Really, he'd just stayed on after the estate settled, because leaving had never quite made sense, and the mortgage was manageable and the rooms still had the shape of someone he loved in them. He looked around it. He thought not for the first time, but more concretely than before, about what it would mean to fill it with different sounds. Different mornings, a different rhythm. He didn't let himself rush the thought. He just let it exist. That was enough for now. Saturday came the way. Saturday mornings come in October in Savannah, slow and golden, and carrying that particular quality of light that makes everything look like it was composed by someone who cared. Ethan parked on the block at 7:51. He sat in the car for 2 minutes. Then he got out. She was already there. Standing outside the coffee place with her hands wrapped around a to-go cup she'd already ordered, wearing a coat he hadn't seen before, her hair down. She was looking at her phone when he walked up, and she looked up when she heard him, and the way her face changed when she saw him, quick, unguarded, immediately and completely real, was something he knew he would remember for the rest of his life. 7:53, she said. "Told you." She held up the cup. "I got here at 7:46, so I already ordered. I got you a black coffee because I remembered." And then immediately worried I was wrong. "You're not wrong," he said. She handed it to him. Their hands were briefly in contact, and neither of them said anything about it, and both of them were aware of it. They walked, not to anywhere in particular, just along the waterfront, where the morning was quiet, and the city was still deciding whether to be awake yet. The coffee was good, the air was cool. The conversation started in the easy place, his work, her plans for the clinic, and moved gradually, naturally, into deeper water. "I found a space," she said, "for the clinic. It's small. Needs work. It's 3 blocks from the coast, and the rent is manageable if I do the first 6 months carefully." She was talking faster than usual. The way she talked when something excited her, when the idea was running faster than the words. "I have enough saved. I've been saving for this for 4 years, honestly, even when I was telling myself I was saving for something else. I think some part of me always knew." "When do you sign?" he asked. "Monday," she said. "I signed the lease Monday." He stopped walking. She took 2 more steps and then stopped and turned. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately read. "What?" she said. He repeated. "You're signing Monday." "Yes, that's fast, I know." She looked at him directly. "But I spent 10 years waiting for the right time and the right permission and the right alignment of everything, and you know what? The clinic doesn't care about any of that. The space is available. I have the money, I have the plan. And I am 34 years old, and if not now, Ethan, when?" He looked at her. Then he nodded. "Monday," he said. "Good." She exhaled like she'd been slightly braced for argument and was relieved not to find it. "My father offered to help with the build-out costs," she said. "I told him I'd think about it. Will you accept it?" "Probably, eventually. But I want to do the first part myself. I want to know that the foundation of it is mine. Does that make sense?" "Completely," he said. They walked again. At some point they stopped at a bench near the water and sat. The sun was higher now. The city was more awake. A couple walked past with a dog. An older man jogged by at a pace that was more commitment than speed. Olivia reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. She held it out to him. He looked at it. "The photograph," she said quietly. He took it. He opened the envelope and slid the photograph out. It was small. A physical print, the kind people used to make before everything went digital. The edges had softened with age. The colors had that particular warmth of photographs from a certain decade that digital images never quite replicate. He looked at it for a long time. 2 young people on a wooden dock. The water was behind them, and the light was the specific light of a Sunday afternoon in early October. The girl had her head tilted slightly toward the boy. The boy was looking at the camera with the expression of someone who doesn't quite realize yet how important this particular moment is. He looked young. He looked like someone who thought he had all the time in the world. He looked like someone who, in 3 days, was going to be completely undone, but didn't know it yet. "Your father took it," Olivia said softly. "He was showing me the camera he'd just bought. He was so proud of it. He said he wanted to test the zoom." She paused. "He printed it out and gave it to me that same week and said, and I'm quoting exactly, 'You two better figure out what you're doing before I get too attached to having you around.'" Ethan's throat tightened. "That sounds like him," he said. He knew, she said. He knew before either of us did. Think a pause. I'm sorry I kept it. I'm glad you kept it, he said immediately. She looked at him. I didn't have anything, he said. After you left. Not a photograph, not a note, nothing. I kept trying to hold on to the image of you, and over time you start to wonder what's memory and what's something you've constructed. What's real and what's just what you needed it to be. He looked at the photograph. This is real. She leaned slightly toward him on the bench. Not dramatically, just closer. I looked at it a lot, she said. In Charleston, when things were bad, when I was convincing myself it was fine and it wasn't fine, I'd take it out and look at it, and I'd think somewhere out there is a person who knew me before all of this. Who knew me before I learned to make myself smaller. You don't have to be smaller, he said. I know that now. She paused. I'm working on believing it. A moment passed between them. Then Ethan said, and he said it carefully, the way you say something you've thought about for a long time and want to get exactly right. I need to tell you something. She turned to look at him fully. I spent a long time telling myself I was over it. Over what happened with us. I told myself I had processed it and accepted it and moved on. And I had, in the sense that I kept living and working and building something. I wasn't sitting in a dark room waiting for you. I want to be honest about that. Okay, she said. But I also never stopped wondering. And I think there's a version of moving on that's real. And a version that's just doing other things with the same weight still in your pocket. And I wasn't sure, until that night in the car, which version I'd been doing. She was very still. Which version? He looked at her. The second one, he said. I was doing everything right, and carrying the wrong thing the whole time. Her breath came out slowly. Me too, she said, me too. They sat with that for a moment. Then she said, so, what do we do with it? I think we do exactly what you said, he said, slowly. Honestly, no jumping into anything we're not ready for. But also, he paused, also not pretending we're starting from zero. Because we're not. We're starting from the middle of something that got interrupted. And that's different. She looked at the water. Different how? You don't have to introduce yourself to me, he said. I already know you, and not the version of you that other people had prepared and presented. The one that showed up in the back of my car in a soaked dress, asking to go anywhere but home. That one, the real one, he paused. She's who I want to know better. Olivia turned her head to look at him. Her eyes were bright. Not crying, just full. The way eyes look when something true has landed somewhere it needed to land. Ethan Carter, she said quietly. Yeah, she stopped. Shook her head slightly. What? You make it very difficult to take this slowly, she said. When you say things like that. He looked at her. Then we take it at whatever pace makes sense, he said. But we take it. That's the only thing I'm sure about. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she reached over and took his hand. Just that, no fanfare, no declaration, just her hand in his on a bench by the waterfront, in the middle of a Saturday morning in October. He looked down at their hands. He thought about the doc in the photograph. Two young people who thought they had all the time in the world and then ran out of it. Two people who lost 10 years to a lie told in a calm voice at a front door and a dining room table. He thought about all the miles between then and now. And he thought quietly, without performing it for anyone, that maybe some things need the full distance of the journey before they can arrive properly. That maybe 24-year-old Ethan and 24-year-old Olivia had loved each other completely and still hadn't been ready for what came after love. For the sustained, unglamorous, honest work of choosing someone, not just when it's easy, but when it costs something. Maybe they needed the 10 years, not to deserve each other. Not because the loss was somehow secretly good, but because they were both, now people who understood what things cost. Who had walked through enough of the hard version of life to know the difference between love and convenience, between choosing someone and needing somewhere to land. They walked back through the city when the coffee was gone and the morning had fully arrived. At one point, without either of them deciding to, they ended up on the street near his father's old garage, the one that was Ethan's garage now, where the company vehicle sat, and Marcus ran the dispatch board, and the whole small, functional, living thing that his father had built continued to operate. Olivia stopped in front of it. She looked at the sign. Carter Transportation. His father's name on it still, because Ethan had never changed it and never intended to. He would be so proud, she said. Ethan looked at the sign. Yeah, he said, I think so, not just of the business. She turned to look at him. Of you, of who you turned out to be. He didn't say anything for a moment. He liked you, he said finally. My father. He never said it in so many words because that wasn't his style. But I knew. He had this thing he did when he really liked someone. He'd make them coffee without asking and just hand it to them. He did it with you, every time you came over. She looked at him. I remember that, she said softly. I remember thinking it was the kindest thing. It was just coffee, Ethan said. It was never just coffee, she said. It was him saying, you belong here. You don't have to explain yourself. Just sit down. He looked at her, and he thought about his father. About the man who built things carefully and loved quietly, and would have, if he were alive, made coffee without asking and handed it across the table, and said nothing because nothing needed to be said. He thought his father would have been very pleased with this Saturday morning. Months passed. The clinic opened on a Tuesday in February, on a clear, cold morning, with a hand-painted sign above the door that Olivia had done herself over 3 weekends at the kitchen table in her new apartment. The sign was imperfect. The letters weren't quite even. She kept it exactly as it was. Ethan drove her there that morning. Not in the cab in his personal truck, because this wasn't a fair, it was a beginning. She stood in front of the door before she unlocked it. I'm nervous, she said. You should be, he said. It means it matters. She looked at him. It matters, she confirmed. She unlocked the door. The first patient arrived that afternoon. A tabby cat named Gerald with a chronic ear infection and an owner who had been driving 30 minutes to the nearest vet for 2 years. He shook Olivia's hand and said he was glad someone had finally set up shop nearby, and she thanked him and got to work. Ethan heard about it that evening, when she called him from the clinic after closing. One patient, she said. Gerald the tabby, ear infection. He was completely dignified about the whole thing. Good start, Ethan said. The best start, she said, and she sounded like herself, entirely clear and certain and fully in the life she had chosen. Richard came to see the clinic in March. He arrived alone on a weekday morning before any patients were scheduled. He stood in the small waiting area and looked around and didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, you built this. I did, Olivia said. He looked at the sign behind the reception desk. Her name on it. I should have let you do this 10 years ago, he said. Yes, she said, you should have. He nodded. The nod of a man who is not going to argue with the truth. He stayed for 40 minutes. He asked questions, real ones. About the practice, about her plans for expanding services, about the community response. He listened to the answers. He didn't offer to fix anything or take over anything or redirect anything toward a version he preferred. When he left, he shook her hand at the door. It was a strange gesture. Formal, from a father to a daughter, in the doorway of her clinic. But Olivia understood it. He was saying, in the language available to him, that he saw her as someone who had built something real. Someone to be taken seriously. She shook his hand back. The process between them was slow. It was not linear. There were weeks that went better than others, and conversations that had to stop and be resumed later. There were moments when old habits retest themselves, when he tried to manage a situation that wasn't his to manage. And she had to hold the line quietly and firmly, and he had to recognize the line and step back. But he stepped back, not every time, not immediately. But he learned. And Margaret, who had spent years in the shadow of a man who took up a great deal of room, began quietly, at her own pace, to take up more room herself. She started a reading group at the library. She told Olivia one Sunday in April that she had always wanted to learn watercolor painting and had finally registered for a class. She said it like a confession, and then corrected herself and said it again like a fact. Ethan watched all of it from a middle distance that was closer than it used to be. He and Olivia took their time. They had coffee on Saturday mornings. They talked on the phone in the evenings, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for 2 hours. They walked the waterfront. They drove together through the city that had held both of their stories for so long. There was a night in April when they were sitting on the steps of the old pier, the same pier where the photograph had been taken, where his father had stood with a new camera, testing the zoom, and the water was very still, and the city behind them was lit and quiet. Olivia was talking about a case from that week, a dog that had come in badly injured and pulled through against everyone's expectations, including hers. She was describing the moment she knew he was going to make it, and her voice was alive with it, that specific aliveness that comes from work that you were made for. And Ethan listened and watched her face, and understood something that had been arriving gradually for months, but chose this moment to become completely clear. He wasn't waiting for something to happen. It was already happening. He had been so accustomed to the feeling of incompleteness, the question in his chest, the weight he'd been carrying that he hadn't noticed when it lifted. He hadn't noticed the exact moment the road stopped feeling like the only place he belonged and started feeling like the way he got to other places. He noticed it now. She stopped talking and looked at him. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "You're doing the thing," she said. "What thing?" "The thing where you've figured something out, and you're not ready to say it yet." He looked at her. "You know that about me," he said. "I know a lot of things about you," she said. "Some of them I remembered. Some of them I've been learning again." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm not carrying it anymore." She looked at him. "The question," he said. "The thing I've had in my chest for 10 years. The why did she leave, the what did I do, the what was I missing. It's gone," he paused. "I didn't notice it leave, but it's gone." She was very still. "Because you got the answer?" she asked quietly. "Because I stopped needing one," he said. "The answer doesn't change the road from here." She looked at him for a long time. Then she leaned over and put her head on his shoulder. "Just that." He put his arm around her. They sat there on the old pier while the city hummed behind them, and the water was still in front of them, and the night did what nights do, moved slowly toward the thing that comes after. He thought about the text that had started everything. "Take me anywhere but home." He thought about a woman in a soaked blue dress asking for somewhere else to go. He thought about the roads between that night and this one, and all the things that had been said in rooms that needed to hear them, and all the people who had slowly, imperfectly, begun the work of becoming more honest versions of themselves. And he thought that the word home, which he had spent his whole life understanding as a place, was something different now. It was not a building you were born in or returned to. It was not a city, though the city mattered. It was not even a person, exactly. It was the feeling of being fully known and choosing to stay anyway. Of being seen in the unglamorous, unperformed version of yourself, and finding that the other person does not look away. It was this pier and this shoulder and this woman who had come back not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she finally understood where she belonged. He held on, and Olivia Bennett, who had once asked to be taken anywhere but home, had finally, truly, completely arrived.